when I got there, I'm like, oh my God, this is what I've been waiting for, right? That kind of thing, So it was a match made in heaven. So I got the machine, started using it immediately. Within 6 months, I bought a second machine, I think, just to give you a sense of how quickly I started. The utilization exploded. And that's because I was using it both for cancer applications and musculoskeletal trauma, just to your point, right? So it's a machine that never gets a break in our clinic. It's being constantly used for something. So, and we could talk further about anti-aging applications and stuff, but it's really been an amazing journey. The results and the benefits from the light therapy have been incredible. So I would consider it to be probably one of the biggest milestones, in my medical career.
Yeah, hi and welcome everybody to a new episode of the New Light Medicine podcast. Today we are looking into different clinical applications of low-level laser therapy and photobiomodulation, mainly in the field of regenerative medicine and also cancer therapy. So I'm very happy, very honored to have Dr. Leonard Kaplan from Buffalo as my guest today. He's an integrative and regenerative medicine specialist, board certified in physical medicine and rehabilitation, and also trained through the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And most important, he's one of the leading clinical experts when it comes to using lasers and light in tissue regeneration, in treating chronic disease, and especially cancer. He's using the most advanced protocols with ultrasound-guided injections like stem cells, exosomes, and of course, always adding the laser. And we are also designing new clinical protocols and diagnostics for neurodegenerative conditions together. But yeah, we will talk about that later today. Yeah, thank you again for being here with us today. And yeah, let's start with some history. Maybe you can give us some background about your work, what the main focus in your clinic is, and also how the interest in light therapy or photobiomodulation started.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Robert. Yeah. So, yeah, and definitely an honor to be on your podcast. So my background is physical medicine and rehabilitation. It's a board certified specialty in the U.S. It's an interesting specialty. It's probably the only conventional medical specialty that looks at the entire individual as a whole, and the whole concept of training in this particular specialty is improving person's ability to heal and improve function. So that it's kind of baked into my DNA essentially, right? So after I completed my residency, I did a fellowship in interventional spine and pain procedures. So those are all guided either with fluoroscopy and then eventually became guided with ultrasound. So over a period of time, I developed an expertise in ultrasound guided procedures, really converted all of my guided treatments, whether they're pain or for repair or for cancer, to an ultrasound guided approach because it's easier to use. A lot of times it's more accurate and there's no radiation involved. So it makes sense. It's just very easily applied in the office. So I've been using ultrasound guided techniques probably since around 2008. I was actually the first person in Buffalo to bring ultrasound, for guidance. The German colleagues have been doing it for much longer than that, so we're actually learning from you guys about ultrasound guidance, So it's been an amazing tool. And then, I was already using it to guide regenerative solutions for repair. So we would use platelets and stem cells, whether I would get them from the body, from like the bone marrow or the fat, or we would get them from labs. So if they were cultured and cultivated from like healthy donors and stuff like that, and those would be injected under ultrasound guidance into like torn tendons and degenerative cartilage, those kind of things, right? I actually have a very large expertise in nerve repair and hydrodissection techniques around the nerves. Ultrasound is amazing for nerve visualization. You could see scarring around nerve tissue, especially in peripheral nerves, whether they're in the arms or legs, small digits like hands, like fingers and toes. And you can inject the same solutions around those nerves and help those nerves repair as well, which is pretty cool. The first it was interesting. I think this is like where the energies align, Robert, right? Is that I started to feel like there were better ways of stimulating healing even before I knew about low-level laser therapy as a science and I would say a school of thought, right? But it just made sense to me intuitively that energetic healing, right, can play a strong part of just our whole arsenal of just how we approach the human body. And then I started getting whispers about light therapy, and I had some colleagues tell me about Weber and Isla. And then I went to my first conference, I think it was 3 years now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and then bought my machine within a week, I think, after that, if not maybe on site. So it kind of like I was mentally and emotionally ready, right? Like it was a perfect combo. So when I got there, I'm like, oh my God, this is what I've been waiting for, right? That kind of thing. So it was a match made in heaven. So I got the machine, started using it immediately. Within 6 months, I bought a second machine, I think, just to give you a sense of how quickly I started. The utilization exploded. And that's because I was using it both for cancer applications and musculoskeletal trauma, just to your point, right? So it's a machine that never gets a break in our clinic. It's being constantly used for something. So, and we could talk further about anti-aging applications and stuff, but it's really been an amazing journey. The results and the benefits from the light therapy have been incredible. So I would consider it to be probably one of the biggest milestones, in my medical career, of adding light therapy to my treatments.
So you would say that it gives a special boost to the cellular injections you did before, right? When you compare when you did this before without the laser and now adding the laser?
So night and day. So I like telling people, like, it's this evolution of regenerative medicine, right? So the older docs that were doing regenerative kind of medicine treatments before I even knew what they were would use a treatment called prolotherapy. Prolotherapy basically stands for proliferative therapy, and the standard solution is just high concentration dextrose, and it's injected into broken down tendon or ligament, and they would use it for cartilage repair, but it really wasn't very strong as that. But an average amount of treatments in the olden days, and we're talking 20 years ago, let's say, right? It would take 6 treatments to get someone feeling better, 6 treatments, right? Then then we started using PRP, right? And then the PRP, or platelet-rich plasma, started to move the needle towards faster repair. So now you're talking maybe, and again, without anything else, about 3 to 4 treatments to get somebody feeling better, right? Then came the ultrasound, right? So now we're precisely placing PRP into the damaged tissue. And now we got probably squarely in the three session territory, right? Then came the light therapy. And now what used to take me 3 treatments, a lot of times takes me 1. That is insanely different. That's incredible, right? So, and this is how I break down my patients, right? So for instance, like meniscal tear in the knee, right? 90% of the time, 1 treatment.
Okay, wow.
1 treatment,
That's
right?
impressive. Yeah.
Ligament and tendon tears, right? Labral tears. 90% of the time, there's always going to be an exception if it's a bigger tear, right? But now most of my patients, when they ask me how many, I'm like, 80% chance going to be 1, which is incredible, right? Because again, before light therapy, I would tell them 3, right? And then we got 20% chance that you meet a second, still less than 3, right? And I almost never have to do 3 at this point. And that's all from light therapy. That's how big of a change it's made.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And yeah, now you already talked a little bit about different areas you're using it on. As we have also plenty of patients listening to this podcast, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the most successful areas when we talk about those regenerative injection therapies. Where do you see the best success?
Yeah, so it works on everything. It's kind of hard to even point a finger at one thing. I would say if we list the things where it excels, right? Well, first of all, you have to reach it, right? So, and I think what makes Weber so unique is the fiber optic system, right? So that's really where the magic is, right? So the fact that you could target the tear by placing the fiber optic light into the tear itself, it makes all the difference in the world, So with that, any kind of tendon or muscle tears respond incredibly well, right? So normally we would inject a solution of whether it's stem cells or platelets, and then I would leave usually I would put 2 to 3 needles into the area, direct the fiber optics into there, leave it there for about 20 minutes. And then that just activates the whole repair cycle. Cartilage tears, we talked about meniscal tears in the knee, one treatment, right? So same thing. Usually I will take 2 photobiomodulating needles, put them into the meniscal tear, inject my solution, thread the fiber optics, and leave it there for about 20 minutes. And we'll run through red, infrared, green light usually. And then people come back in the month, and most of the time they're repaired. Labral tears, very, very successful. So in conventional wisdom, if you have a hip labral tear or shoulder labral tear, you need surgery. And I would tell you that probably, I would say 90% of the time I can repair those labral tears with a combination of platelets and light, right? The exception is very large tears. That's the only exception, right? So if the tear happens to be, when you look at, let's say, a labral tear, and you're talking about the circumference of the tear, right? If it's greater than 40%, so it's torn that far around the socket, the odds start to get less, right? But the most common tears are small. They're within 10 to 15% of the rim of the joint. Those do beautifully with these treatments. They respond very well. So, and then the last one I want to mention is nerve tissue, right? So nerves respond incredibly well to biomodulation. So I would, we could do that for carpal tunnel. I could do that for nerve entrapments in legs and arms, and same thing, sciatic nerve entrapments in the leg. So inject and then leave the needle or 2 right around the nerve. Sometimes I'll put one underneath and one above, and then kind of transilluminate through, that way. And then, just stimulates repair that much faster.
Yeah, very impressive. Thank you for sharing those insights. So, local tissue regeneration works very well with the laser. We all know that. What are your thoughts on the systemic use? When you use the IV laser, I know you also combine it often with infusion therapy. So, maybe you can also share some of your experiences.
Yeah, we're using it. So when I brought laser into my clinic, I was using it for chronic illness because they were kind of like the more urgent. And at that time, I only had one machine. So I just had to prioritize, basically, So the wellness population, and we have a pretty large anti-aging population as well. They kind of got left a little bit behind until now, or until recently. And so in the chronic world, Lyme disease was a huge one for lasers. It made an amazing difference. So there are other things we're doing, like ozone therapy, but using things like riboflavin with blue light activation makes all the difference in the world. Methylene blue with red and infrared light activation makes all the difference in the world. And what's beautiful about these treatments when they're activated with light, so we kind of call it we're running the fluid over the laser, right? So you have a benefit from running the fluid over the laser because you get this activation. But then the laser presence in the vein has its own biomodulation as well, with inflammation reduction, improvement in circulation, and its own antibacterial, antipathogenic properties, right? So you have a double benefit when you're doing that by making the solutions better, able to penetrate intracellularly or get to the pathogens, and by also activating the immune system through the blood, simply circulating past the laser tip, right? And then now we're using it routinely for our anti-aging population as well. So there, the name of the game is improved nitric oxide production, right? So we're talking about blue laser, for instance, with that, right? Improved energy production, so red, green, infrared even, right? So energy, mitochondrial function, And then still working on activating the solutions that we're putting in. So what people get as a benefit when I'm running these nutrients for energy production or inflammation reduction over the laser is an exponential improvement in sense of well-being. So people will come out feeling better. I think I'm seeing longer duration of benefit, right, from these treatments. And we kind of use it for, everything from things like NAD, methylene blue still with an anti-aging population for energy production to things like olefinolia and spermidine for autophagy, right? So you got this broad spectrum for just wellness, and we're using lights to activate all the solutions.
Which other therapies do you feel are very synergistic with a laser? I guess you're doing some more in your protocols. Like I think you already mentioned ozone, for example.
Yeah, ozone's beautifully synergistic. I mean, we're not running it at the same time, but we'll typically run it right afterwards. One of the synergisms is this oxidation, right? So, creating that stressor on the cell to make the cell more resilient. So the photobiomodulation, especially with a little bit of stronger concentration and with like red light, for instance, right? And infrared, if you do it in a piggyback fashion to ozone is oxidative, which means that it puts a stressor in the cell that improves the cell's ability to recycle its own antioxidants, right? So I tell people it's like taking the cell to the gym, right? So you stress it, you work it, and the cell becomes stronger when you stress it, right? But if you double up with the light therapy, it's an additional input into the cell to make that cell even more resilient. So the ozone and light therapy are really, really, really nicely synergistic. I think that the light therapy is synergistic with stem cell and exosome infusion as well, because there, what you're doing is you're increasing circulation, nitric oxide production, which creates better penetration of that exosome into the tissue. So we'll use it just as synergistically for like infusions of exosomes, for instance. So a lot of different synergies. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then of course there is cancer, where I see you have a very strong expertise, and you're one of those very few guys who out there who is like really brave, like doing those very advanced cancer protocols, like puncturing cancers, going very close with your ultrasound guided injections.
Yeah.
I remember you told me some brave stories when you treated very difficult cases. So I think our listeners would be very interested in that as well.
So I think, again, the secret, so there are clinics that use surface low-level laser therapy. So like even with a Weber, if they're using a shower head or something like that, right? And in very superficial cancers, that could be very useful. But the challenge is a lot of times these tumors are deep. And so the superficial therapy just simply doesn't reach. The penetration is just not there, So with what we're switching to kind of photodynamic therapy from photobiomodulation, where we're talking about optimization of repair, optimization of metabolism. Now we're talking about something that creates enough energy to actually have a destructive force behind it. And for us to be able to concentrate enough of that destructive force, you have to get as close as you can into the tissue, right? And you have to put as much of the energy as you can into that tissue. So the concept of distance becomes important, right? So the further away my light is from the source, the less energy is transferred to that source. And of course, the less destructive it becomes, right? So this is, again, the brilliance of the fiber optics. So, and of course, an absolute necessity of ultrasound guidance. This is where you can't do it without ultrasound guidance, So, and I'm just fortunate that I had this experience as an interventional physician before this, where I already had the skill set of guiding needles under ultrasound into challenging areas. All I had to do is just adapt the light techniques, to what I was already doing. So it really didn't require that much extra training or learning. It was already there. So, probably the lowest hanging fruit is going to be things that are more accessible and safe and very easy to get to with ultrasound. Probably the best example is breast tumors, right? So the breast tumor, it's just, it's even if it's deep in the fat, you're talking, maybe something like, 3 centimeters you can get into most tumors, and then under ultrasound, you could position the needles in the way that you're covering almost like a grid, the entire tumor. So the concept of each needle, if it's just a straight fiber optic, covering about a centimeter squared, so we can calculate the tumor dimensions and put enough needles to cover the entire area. And you just couldn't do that any other way. You need ultrasound for that, and you need those fiber optics to be able to deliver that much energy into the tumor. Makes all the difference in the world. Some of the trickier places, liver. So I've been able to shrink liver mets by carefully guiding a needle into the areas that are more accessible, sometimes for reduction and sometimes for palliative purposes. Large liver tumors are extremely painful. It's a huge quality of life issue. And I've had stories where 2 treatments eliminated shoulder pain and ribcage pain just by shrinking that one tumor. It wasn't a life-saving procedure, but the quality of life for that person was immense. So, there's palliation, if you want to almost think of it as a separate category for laser therapy. I just had a gentleman who had a small cell lung cancer. He had a metastasis to his hip muscle, and he couldn't walk up and down stairs. One treatment completely took the pain away. One photodynamic treatment. That's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing, right? One treatment. That's all it took. He was sore for about 3 to 4 days, and all of a sudden, and when we remeasured the tumor, it shrunk about 35%. And that was enough to take the pressure off the muscle where he could now walk. So he became much more independent. Again, didn't cure his cancer, but again, improved the quality of life significantly. This is from your dad, I've done some really cool things with lung cancer, where we take a cylindrical catheter and make a person swallow it. So we do a transnasal esophageal approach. My best success story was a thymus tumor.
Okay.
A thymoma, right? So this is a tumor that sits between the heart and the breastbone, right? And so it's right above the esophagus, basically, right? So we were able to get the tube down, and she was getting these every other day. And I think we ended up doing like 8 sessions altogether. And it was I think it was a 60-minute treatment of basically swallowing it, dropping it. I measured the distance from the oral pharynx, from the throat to the tumor on the CAT scan. So I knew how far down to drop the catheter, and it shrunk about 70%. It's wild, right? It shrunk so much that she became operable. So this is amazing, right? So she went from inoperable, it was so big that no cardiovascular surgeons were willing to take it, to now a cardiovascular surgeon going in and operating and completely removing the tumor. And that's actually very recent. That was about a year ago. That's incredible. No one does that, right? So
yeah, exactly. It's all about the ability, what you already mentioned, and you're one of the few who are doing such procedures. But if you are able to really reach the tumor, then you can have amazing success. So that's, always very good to hear from your side.
Colorectal tumors, you have to mention those, because I've had some incredible successes with those as well, right? And there, we would use, so a lot of the colorectal cancer patients are on this chemotherapy regimen, right, that uses 5-fluorouracil or 5-FU, which is actually a strong photosensitizing agent for ultraviolet light, for UV. So we would take advantage of that. So the people would come and they would go to a local oncology center, and it would get a 2-day infusion of this 5-FU, and they would come to me during their infusion. And while they're getting infused, because they leave the hospital with like a pump, so it keeps infusing, right? They would come to my office, and we would do a colorectal approach with a cylindrical catheter with a 40 milliwatt UV light. And I've had 3 cases in a row with complete resolution of the tumor, like literally when they went in. Now, again, I'm sure the chemo had something to do with it, but the results were so amazing that we know that the light therapy was definitely a contributor to that as well.
Yeah, that's very impressive. And here again, you're doing really great pioneering work. I don't think even we did such an approach before. Of course, we know that some chemo substances can be used as so-called chemosensitizers, but we use it more on a systemic level as well. But yeah, what you just mentioned, like treating it then directly or locally in the colon area, that's a very interesting approach.
Yeah. So that's been great. Bladder, had a couple bladder patients, so yeah, good stuff. Very, very cool.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So yeah, what else do I wanted to talk to you about? Yeah, next topic, of course, is now what everybody is waiting for right now is our new development, as you know, the brain technology. And of course, also here you will be one of the first out there to get one. We already talked a lot. Also, we have this diagnostic tool available in your clinic, this ViewMind technology. Yeah, it would be great if you could share some of your ideas, like combining it with a good diagnostic tool and what you would expect now with this new technology when we talk about all the neuro stuff.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, right? It's the same concept. So you have photobiomodulation, but now you're talking about brain tissue, and you're still working in that reactive oxygen species world, right? Where you're creating this oxidative stress, and it's a direct stimulant to the nerve tissue to repair. The cool thing is that, especially with the new helmet, Robert, right? I mean, you're covering the entire cortex, right? And there's better penetration through the skull bone with the older version, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So we would expect some amazing results, but I will tell you that we have the older version that we're using, right? And we also use nasal light therapy, right? With that's red light, and we're combining it with some other things as well. I mean, it's not just that alone. So it'd be nice to do some studies just purely with photobiomodulation of the brain, before and after. I haven't done that yet, but the results I've had have been really impressive. So let me talk about the ViewMind for a minute. So ViewMind is a very interesting technology. It's about 25 years of research from Argentina. The Argentinian neuroscientists were really ahead of the curve, and they were able to map out light eye movements and pupil response to different brain functions, different cognitive performance functions. So we call them the 7 executive functions of the brain, right? So we're talking like executive function itself, processing speed, working memory, facial perception, right? All these different things that we use to, our brain to be functional and really be high performers and high achievers in our lives. It's a VR visual. It's not virtual reality, but they use the virtual reality goggles that they put on a person. And the idea there is that eliminates distraction, right? And one thing that they figured out is that, what it also does is by measuring the eye movement, it takes out anything that can slow down the response time artificially, right? Creating wrong results. So the biggest example was really the keyboard on the computer becoming the interface that is a barrier to fast response times, right? It's another thing to learn and it's another thing to do accurately, but it's not necessarily a reflection of your cognitive function. It's a motor skill, right? You know what I mean? So the old traditional brain testing is done on a keyboard on a computer. If you press the wrong button, press the wrong key, the results are off. And then, so it made those tests essentially unreproducible. You never trusted the baseline. And every time you did them, you got a different result. So how do you know what you're improving when you can't trust the starting point, when you can't trust the first score that you get, right? So that's what they were working on. And I think they kind of solved it. So the idea is that you take the hands out of the equation. So it's just your eyes moving. So you take the keyboard and any of that interface out, right? And then it's a series of 4 different tests that require accuracy of placement of the gaze on the target, accuracy of tracking when the target moves very quickly and your eyes follow, decision making of whether the target is moving correctly or incorrectly, recall of patterns, colors, and shapes. right? So that's what they're doing, right? All timed, and the whole test is actually 13 minutes long, which is also very important because what happens when you take a test for a very long time, you start to get tired. And then that becomes another problem because it's inaccurately lowering your scores too, because now you get brain fatigue, right? So they've solved a lot of these issues that really were not solved before, and there were big problems in accuracy. So that's what we use. We use this ViewMind. The protocol is we do it before and after intervention, right? And like right now, we had one gentleman who came in for cognitive optimization. We used, first Weber helmet with red light. Of course, we did other things. We did some stem cell therapy, but his executive function score went from 76 to 94.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. And we did 3 treatments, 3 days in a row. It's impressive, right?
Oh, yeah.
And what we do now, just to be sure that we're accurate, is we do the first test twice.
Uh-huh.
Right. Because I want to, I'm still like this is early days for us. And I want to be comfortable saying like, these are true improvements. Right. So we did it twice. He came in the 70s both times. I think like one was 74, one was 76. And then we did it 5 days after the 3 days of therapy, and his executive function score went to 94. And he could feel it in his work, so we actually just met like a week ago, and he's like, yeah, and he has ADHD. So he already has difficulty concentrating, and he said it made an incredible amount of difference. What would be our step for us, you and I, right, is to now look at the pure photobiomodulation as an intervention first.
Yeah.
Right. And then maybe then say, okay, well, what about that plus this? Right. So you kind of have to dissect. But certainly we have plenty of people that we could do just photobiomodulation on and then just follow the ViewMind results and kind of get some objective data. I think it would be incredible.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And good news is that we will get the first batch of the brain devices now within the next 2 weeks, and then I will get one to you for sure.
Okay.
And yeah, really
Great.
looking forward to those ViewMind results. And yeah, I mean, hopefully in March when we meet for our conferences and you are giving a lecture again, I'm really looking forward for the first data you would share
Get
there.
some preliminary findings. I look forward to that as well. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wonderful. So basically now coming to the end, is there anything else you would like to share or when you look in the future, when you think about laser therapy, photodynamic therapy, is there anything on your personal wish list, like when it comes to research or product development or something where you see gaps or where we can improve
Yeah,
maybe?
product development, I think, is probably a stronger topical application, right? That allows me to get a little bit more penetration for wellness people where I'm not necessarily putting needles in. One of the things I would love to be able to do is apply these treatments to people while they're getting their IVs for like parasympathetic reset. Right? So the vagal nerve activation, like solar plexus, carotid artery, and but I want a little bit more juice, a little bit more power. So that would be great. So a better handheld device with some more energy and a little bit less cumbersome, right? Because this right now with the wires attached to the machine is just it's a little bit more difficult to use. I think that would be amazing. I think in general, just probably and you guys are already working in that field anyway, probably more power, right? Figuring out how to deliver more power and more energy to tissue, whether it's through a needle or through surface, right? I mean, because that's kind of like the next step, right? Is to get a little bit more. It's time saving because you can deliver more in less time. So that helps, right? People spend less time on the table and that kind of thing. What else? I think that's probably the biggest one for me. The research, I think, would be, it'd be interesting to see a little bit more research in the application of botanical solutions on, and intelligence of the individual, right? So, for instance, like if you give somebody oral EGCG and then you use photobiomodulation of that product, can you improve cognition or can you reduce inflammation? And so those are all very interesting to me, is starting to use these natural products, right? And then amplify them with light but figuring out how to test the before and after, because that's challenging. that's challenging. I would tell you, there's a physician in California who's doing work with metabolomics. So he's able to test the production of proteins by the cell. And so what I'm hoping is to work with him and do these applications, light therapy, botanicals, and then do blood work. So you could send him blood specimens, and we could do a blood specimen before, blood specimen after, and see if we're actually seeing cellular activation, and so that's an amazing research possibility right there for sure, so yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm thinking of right now.
Yeah, thank
So,
you. This is
yeah.
actually very good input. We can certainly do something in this direction. Yeah, so thank you very much. Is there anything else you would like to share in the end? Maybe you can share something like your contact information of your clinic, of course, again, as we have very often
Yeah.
patients listening with cancer issues or also other disorders or any other things like events you would like to promote. Of course, we already mentioned the conference we are doing together in March again in San Diego, the ISLA conference, where we invite all practitioners to. Of course, that's always a great training opportunity with you on stage and in the workshops. This is always great. But yeah, anything else you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in the services we have a large facility in downtown Buffalo. The name of the practice is OWM Integrative Wellness. So you can find us on the website. And we have a very active social presence. So we have Instagram and Facebook presence. And of course, the website is pretty detailed. So if anyone's interested in learning more, they could follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and check out our website. I think we certainly always are very happy to talk and answer questions in person as well.
Awesome. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think it was a good conversation. Thank you very
Yeah.
much again.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, for everybody out there, if you enjoyed the conversation, please feel free to share it with someone who might benefit. And yeah, follow our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. And yeah, we're looking forward to the next episode. So more to come in the near future. And yeah, big thanks again to Dr. Kaplan.
Perfect. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to that helmet.
Yes.
Can't wait to try it. All right. Take care. Enjoy your holidays.